course, we're in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic. Hopefully it's coming to a close, but it has really changed so many of our lives. And so many people are dealing with the fact that everything is closed, that things are canceled, that loved ones have been sick or died. Some are afraid of being sick themselves. Some people are frankly, just struggling with the fact that you've been sitting in your home by yourself for a long time and you're dealing with anxiety or depression. Whatever you're dealing with right now, I want you to know that God knows that God is here for you, and that God actually gave us a word for this year at the end of last year. At the end of our last service, or during our last service last year, we ministered a message called "It's Gonna Be All Right." And we talked about the fact that that's what God was saying for this year, and that he was telling us that ahead of time because rough times were coming. Well, we know that's exactly what's happened. It's been a rough year. And yet what God said is still true. It's going to be all right. In fact, not only is it going to be all right, by the end of the year, it's going to be all right. I believe God's going to take this time and he's going to cause this year to be the best we've ever had. I think that we're going to come out of this better than we ever have before. But right now, we got to deal with where we are. And one of the areas that many people are struggling in is finances. Right now, many people are, of course, not working. And so we're seeing that our income is dropping. A lot of people who even own businesses are struggling. They're concerned about whether or not their business will be able to survive this. And yet it's going to be all right in your finances as well if you do things God's way. And so I want to help you today to do that, to do things God's way so God can provide for you in the middle of this. And in fact, take you to higher heights financially than you've experienced before. So I'm going to start in 2 Kings chapter 4 in verse 1. It reads, "A certain woman of the wives of the sons of the prophets cried out to Elisha, saying, 'Your servant, my husband, is dead. And you know that your servant feared the Lord. And the creditor is coming to take my 2 sons to be his slaves.'" Well, notice the situation that this woman is in. In fact, the words that are written here are cried out. But if you look up the original Hebrew, because the Old Testament was originally written in Hebrew, you'll find it means to shriek. So she's almost screaming at the man of God, saying, "My husband has died. He served you. He loved God. And he left me in such deep debt that the creditor, the repo man, right? He's shown up at my house. He's there right now to take my 2 sons to be slaves. I am about to lose everything." And so I want you to notice that when she was in that position, she did do something right. And that is, she went to God for an answer. Now, of course, in her day and age, that meant you had to go to the man of God. Nowadays, you can go to God directly because Jesus came and he made a way for us to do that. But the point is, she went to God for an answer. The Bible says in all your ways, all your decisions, acknowledge him and he will direct your path. God promises to give us answers when we go to him. And sometimes we find ourselves in situations like this one, where the only way out is God's way out. It's kind of like going into a maze and if without somebody showing you the map, showing you, this is when you should turn left and when you should turn right, you could be in there for a long time. You may never get out. And sometimes that's where we find ourselves in life. And that's where some people are right now when it comes to their finances. Without God's help, you're not getting out of this. Without God's help, you're not going to make it. Without God's help, your business is going to fail. But God is here to help you. And so I want to help you to see something that will really, how he wants to help you. I'll say it that way. And so let's go to Proverbs chapter 8 and verse 20. And this is the wisdom of God speaking. And the wisdom of God is the words of God written or spoken. And so God's wisdom is found in the Bible. His Bible is full of his wisdom. It is his wisdom. And then when God speaks to your heart, because he does do that for those that are following him, that's also the wisdom of God. Well, notice what the wisdom of God will do for you. In Proverbs 8, verse 20, it says, "I lead in the way of righteousness, in the midst of the paths of judgment." So, right, wisdom is saying, I lead you to do things the right way. I lead you to live your life in a way that is right before God. Well, then notice what else wisdom does. One of the reasons why God gives us wisdom, that I may cause those that love me to inherit substance. The New Living Translation simply says there, wealth, and I will fill their treasures. So notice that one of the reasons why God gives us wisdom is so that we can inherit wealth. One of the reasons why God gives us wisdom is so that he can fill our treasures, or today we would say our bank accounts. So much so that wisdom says, I cause those that love me to inherit substance. In other words, wisdom did it. Wisdom is the one that will produce this. The wisdom of God will bring wealth into your life. It will cause you, once again, to inherit, get this, because I don't want you to miss this, wealth, not just to have a little something, but wealth. That's abundance, right? That's when you have more than enough. That's when you are prospering. That's when people consider you wealthy or rich. Wisdom will make you wealthy. Wisdom will not just cause a little something to be in your bank account. It won't just cause your needs to be met. The wisdom of God will fill your treasures. In fact, that word fill even means to overflow. So God has given us wisdom because he wants that wisdom to help us to have wealth. We can say it this way: the wisdom of God will lead you to the wealth of the world. As you follow wisdom, then you'll find yourself in wealth. It's kind of like the old Wizard of Oz movie where it said, follow the yellow brick road, right? Follow the wisdom road, and it will lead you to the wealth God wants you to have. In fact, what's really interesting about wisdom is that the Bible teaches that it causes you to have to get to a place where you can create witty inventions. In fact, let me back up and just say it this way. In Matthew chapter 17, in verse 24, we see an example of this. We see a couple of men coming to Jesus and actually coming to Peter and asking if Jesus pays taxes. And since we're in tax season, that kind of is relevant, right? And, Peter kind of gives, he doesn't really know how to answer. And he goes into the house and Jesus says, what do they want? And eventually Jesus tells him, I want you to go to the sea, grab a hook, throw it in the water, and the first fish that comes up, open his mouth, and in it is a piece of money. Well, what's implied is that that's what Peter did. He went to the sea, he threw the hook. When he grabbed the first fish that came up, there was money in it, and it was enough money to pay for his taxes and Jesus's taxes. Well, that wisdom brought that money. And that's how God works. He will give you wisdom to bring you wealth. If I were to give you a lottery ticket, and let's just say it was a winning lottery ticket, let's pretend this is a lottery ticket. And it, you knew that the facts were that this lottery ticket was worth $10 million. Well, now this ticket is the wisdom, right? And when you turn it in, you get the wealth. Well, the wisdom of God brings you the wealth of God. And so, of course, by the way, I don't believe in playing a lottery, but it's a good example. I think you get it. Psalm 119 only continues to illustrate this in verse 98. It says, your commands, and that's his wisdom, make me wiser than my enemies, for they are my constant guide. So your commands, your wisdom make me wise, right? Yes, I have more insight than my teachers, for I am always thinking of your laws. I am even wiser than my elders, for I have kept your commandments. So the wisdom of God makes you wiser than even your enemies, wiser than your elders. It gives you insight that maybe your teachers don't have. It's the wisdom of God that can cause you to once again prosper, not just financially, frankly, but in every area of life. That's why the Bible says in Proverbs 4, get wisdom. And in all you're getting, get understanding. It all starts with you getting wisdom. And think about this. Most of the greatest inventors of our time in our country's history credit their inventions to God. Whether it's George Washington Carver or it's Edison or so many others, when you get into their stories, you'll find that so many of them talk about that moment where God dropped wisdom into their heart. where God revealed something to them about something they had been studying, something they had been researching, and it led to a breakthrough that changed not only their life, but in some cases changed the world. And so the wisdom of God is what you need right now to help you to have the money that you need, to help you to get to the place where you're out of debt and your needs are met and you've got so much more to help God and help others with. Well, in 2 Kings chapter 4, we can go back to this story. In verse 2, notice what the prophet said to her. It says, so Elisha said to her, what shall I do for you? Tell me, what do you have in the house? And she said, your maidservant has nothing in the house. That may be where you are right now. You might be saying, I don't really have anything. There's nothing I can really do about my situation. But that's not all she said. But a jar of oil. Well, she did have something in the house. And God was going to use what she had. God will use what you have. And you may say, what do I have? Well, I don't even have oil in my house. Actually, you have oil too. Your oil might just be the talents God's given you, because the Bible teaches that everyone has gifts, talent from heaven. Your talent may be different than mine, but everyone has it. Your oil might be an idea God dropped in your heart. Maybe it's an invention or an idea for a business. Whatever it is, you actually have oil now. The prophet asked her, what do you have in the house? I want to ask you, what do you have in your heart? What is that idea that you've been sitting on, that you told somebody else about, that you're kind of excited about, that maybe keeps you up at night, that you just haven't done, or you just haven't finished? Because that's the wisdom of God that's going to bring you the wealth that you need. You know, what you really need is the wisdom of God on the steps that you need to take to bring that God idea to life. And I want to give you 3 steps to do that today, because I believe that right now in this time, so many of us are kind of pausing and looking at our lives, kind of pausing and evaluating whether or not I have done some of the things that I always wanted to do, whether or not I've acted on some of the ideas. I've done the work necessary to bring those things to life. And so I'm talking to people, I believe, who already have something in your heart. And you might need a little help in figuring out how to make this thing actually happen. So there's 3 things that you can do that we can find in this story. The first one is very simply this: do the grunt work. We go back to 2 Kings 4. Notice in verse 3 what the prophet of God said to her. Go, borrow vessels from everywhere, from all your neighbors, empty vessels. Do not gather just a few. So the first thing he says for her to do, and by the way, this seems like a crazy thing to do, right? The creditor's sitting at the house ready to take my kids. I need money right now. And you're telling me to go gather vessels. Why? Well, God's way isn't always our way, right? I know there's some things I've been dealing with personally in the financial arena. I've had to believe God for some things. And, what he said to me is, things that I would say, God, that's not going to help. I need cash. And you're talking about this, but you got to trust him. His way is the only way to get you where you need to get to, right? And so in this case, he tells her, go borrow vessels. Today, we would say bowls or jars, right? And he says, I want you to go get vessels from a couple places. He says, everywhere. He says, all your neighbors. And then he mentions, don't gather just a few. Those are key words. Everywhere, all, and not a few. Why? The more vessels she gathered, the more oil she would get, the more money she would have at the end of this. In other words, if she would just be diligent in this part of the assignment God gave her, it was going to produce the results that she needed. And that's something that we all need to pay attention to. A lot of times when it comes to ideas that we have or businesses that we want to start, there is some work that has to be done that we don't really look forward to. We don't really want to do the grunt work. We don't really want to go to all of my neighbors' houses and knock on every one of their doors. We don't want to put together the business plan. We don't want to take the classes or develop the skills that we need to develop. But you got to do the grunt work for God to do the work that you need him to do. You know, even when you think about David in the Bible, that's a guy who God told he would be king one day. And yet the Bible teaches that when the time came where God opened a door for him to come into the palace, for him to, serve the guy who was the king, he was ready. He was someone who had developed his musical skills so that when they needed someone to play the harp, and they said, who's the best at this? They thought of David. He took the time to develop his skills. He did the grunt work. This is why education is important. Now, maybe that doesn't mean you're going to a four-year university. Maybe your education is an apprenticeship, but you need to do what it takes to develop your skills so that you are ready when God opens the door. Personally, one of the things I've done besides pastoring a church is I've learned how to write screenplays. And years ago, God dropped in my heart that he wanted me to write screenplays to make movies. And I have a degree, but my degree is in business. I have another degree, but it's in ministry. I have a degree in writing screenplays. And so when God first said that to me, he, of course, dealt me about going ahead and learning how to do it. And what I did was I kind of went and found a little class to kind of help me on the side. And I didn't really want to put any more time into it. And it helped me some. But, my first screenplay was awful. And then years later, as I kind of learned a little bit more, I would go through, I would get some screenplays critiqued and I'd read some articles and I might read a book here or there. But once again, I just didn't really put the work in. And finally got to the place where God got my attention and said, I need you to go through this school so that you can learn how to write screenplays. And it was going to require a significant investment in money and a significant investment in my time. But when I finally did that is when I finally ended up with a good screenplay. And even after that, he opened a door where I could work with an individual who is a college professor who actually teaches screenwriting. And they helped me. And so now I have a professionally done screenplay that many people think is great. And now we're moving forward. And I'll probably talk about that a little bit more as we get into this. My point is that honestly, I was being lazy. And being lazy won't produce the results that you want. In fact, the Bible says in Proverbs 10:4, he who has a slack hand, well, we don't use the word slack today, although we sometimes call people slackers. But in other words, this word means lazy. That person becomes poor. But the hand of the diligent makes rich. So notice that both people have a hand. Everybody has time. Everybody has talents. The difference between the one that is rich and is poor is what they do with their hand. Proverbs 10:4 in the New Living Translation reads in this way, lazy people are soon poor. Hard workers get rich. We've gotten this idea in our society that if someone is rich, it's because they're crooked. And it's just not true. And it's really a problem. Is where some of the socialism mindset comes from, is if you have a lot of money, you must have done something wrong. The Bible says the opposite. Most of the time, it's because you've been diligent. Sure, there are those that are wicked. The Bible talks about the wicked rich. But the majority of the time, people who take the time to do the grunt work are the ones that see God bless them. And so you've got to be diligent about developing your talent. You've got to be diligent about doing what it takes to develop your idea or to develop your business, because when you are diligent about the grunt work, that's when things happen on your behalf. Well, number 2, don't take shortcuts. Don't take shortcuts. In 2 Kings chapter 4 and verse 4, it says, and when you come in, you shall shut the door behind you and your sons. Then pour it into all those vessels and set aside the full ones. So she went from him and shut the door behind her and her sons, who brought the vessels to her, and she poured it out. Now it came to pass when the vessels were full that she said to her son, bring me yet another vessel. And he said to her, there is not another vessel. So the oil ceased. Notice what the man of God told her to do. He told her that once she had all the vessels, to number one, shut the door before she did what God wanted her to do. And as I was reading this again, I thought about the fact that not everybody needs to know about your dream. Not everybody needs to know about your idea. Sometimes you got to keep it to yourself and just a few people that are actually there to help you. Her sons knew because they were there to help. There are some people that probably will be a part of your dream, a part of your journey, and they'll be there to help. But not everybody needs to know what's going on, because people will sometimes discourage you from chasing the very thing God told you to do, the very thing that'll help you get out of the mess that you're in or into the promised land God has for you. Notice that she poured out into those vessels until they were full. And that's really important. And we kind of touched on this a little bit in the last point, but we're going to go a little farther with this one. You need to fully develop the idea or the business that God has given you, right? You need to fully develop that idea. You need to pour out the oil until it's full. And so a lot of times, once again, we like to just see things done, right? When you get excited about whatever's in your heart, a song, a book, a screenplay, a business, whatever it is, we're excited about the finished product. I want to see the finished product. I want other people to experience the finished product. And we rush things and we take shortcuts. And what ends up happening is the finished product is not what it's supposed to be. It's not what we dreamed that it would be. And so we need to have an excellence mindset. I wrote something down as I was preparing, and it's very simply this: excellence is a conductor for the miraculous. For example, in John chapter 6, when Jesus fed 5,000 men with 5 loaves and 2 fishes, one detail in that story that may have been missed by some of us is the fact that he had the disciples sit the men down in ranks of 50 and 100. In other words, he had them be organized and before they handed out the food. And then when they were done handing out the food and the people were done eating, he had his men go throughout the entire area and gather all the fragments that they could. And they found they had 12 baskets full, because if you waste not, you want not, right? Your treasure is in your fragments. And that might be a word for somebody right now who's looking for answers in regards to some of the bills that you're facing, some of the financial challenges that you're having. But I want you to notice that him doing things in order helped God do something supernatural. And the same thing is true for you. So do things in such a way that is excellence. When I went to school, when I was younger, the tagline or the motto for the school was excellence or nothing at all. That needs to be the motto for you pursuing whatever God idea you happen to have. That I'm going to do everything with excellence. I'm going to give my best. And that's key to say it that way, because sometimes the pursuit of perfection is the enemy of progress. And sometimes we don't end up not doing anything because everything has to be perfect. Well, I'm not talking about things being perfect. Done is better than perfect. But I am talking about you doing your best. You do your best on every step of that process, and God can do something with it. Even as I preach today to a camera, right? It's hard to do this for me because I'm used to being in a room with other people, but I can rest in the fact that I'm doing my best so God can use it. And that's what you have to do. You have to always do your best. Don't take shortcuts. I remember hearing a story by one minister I respect by the name of Kenneth Copeland. He was talking about the fact that they were in a studio. He's a musician, and they were working on a song, and they kept working on it over and over and over and over again. And not everybody in the room was really as dedicated to God and not necessarily even a Christian. And so one guy finally said, all right, that's good enough for gospel. And of course, Brother Copeland lost it. What do you mean good enough for gospel? This is for God. You give God your best. And I want you to know that your God idea isn't just so you can have some money. It's really about more than that. God has given you a gifting. He's given you an idea to serve the world, to help other people, to build his kingdom. And so when you're doing something for God, you should do your best, just like he gave his best when he gave Jesus for you. In Exodus chapter 40, we see how this works. In verse 33, we find Moses finishing the tabernacle God had told him to build. God dropped that idea in his heart, gave him a picture of it, and he wanted him to complete it. And in verse 33, it reads, then he hung the curtains forming the courtyard around the tabernacle and the altar. And he set up the curtain at the entrance of the courtyard. So at last, Moses finished the work. See that? He finally finished it. As far as God was concerned, it was done. So then what happens? Then the cloud, a glory cloud, right, covered the tabernacle. The glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. And Moses could no longer enter the tabernacle because the cloud had settled down over it, and the glory of God filled the tabernacle. So once he finished the work, the glory showed up. God showed up. When you finish the work, you do things, you do your best, you pour out till it's full. When this is now, you're saying, I've gone as far as I can go. I've done as much as I can do. That's when God steps in and really starts to open some doors in your life. And so it's so important that you avoid shortcuts, that you do your best. And number 3, hustle and flow. I know there was a movie out with that title. I actually haven't seen it, but I like the title. And that's really the third thing you got to do. You got to hustle and flow to make your God idea come to pass. So what do you mean by that? Well, in 2 Kings chapter 4 and verse 7, we finished this woman's story, and it says, then she came and told the man of God, and he said, go, sell the oil and pay your debt, and you and your sons live on the rest. Notice that she now had a house full of bowls full of oil. That's worth something, right? That's worth something. Oil was worth something. She had a house full of it. But it still wasn't going to help her. She needed to take that product and she needed to hustle so that she could get some money from that product. And so that's what the man of God says. And I do want you to notice something else, by the way. She didn't just run out and just immediately start selling it either. She realized that in every step of my process here, every step of this miracle, I need to hear from God. I need the wisdom of God. So when it was done, she went back to the man of God. What do I do now? Even though naturally she could probably come up with some things, she realized God's way is the best way. What do I do now? And that's when he told her, sell the oil, pay the debt, live off the rest. I know for me with the screenplay I mentioned earlier, and I'm just sharing my story because that's the story I know, that I've learned to not just run out and just do things with it. In fact, there was a time where I did try to just do things, but I've learned to just go back to God and say, I've got this oil right here. It is done. It is ready. What do you want me to do now? And since myself and our team has followed God's instructions, we found door after door after door is open. God's doing something supernatural as a result of it. And that's just how he works. I know for FX Church, the same thing was true. God dealt with me about this church, and I kept going to him step by step. What do I do now? What do I do now? What do I do now? And now we have hundreds of us that gather on Sundays, and really thousands of us that gather online. And it's just the beginning. We're only a year and a half old. We got there because we were following his instructions. The Bible says, once again, in all your ways, look to him and he will direct your path. All your decisions, major or minor, look to God and God will give you the direction that you need. Well, let's go back to hustling and flowing. This woman was told to sell the oil. Well, that means that she was going to have to package it, right? So it's not spilled when they're trying to carry it somewhere. That means she's going to have to find the best spot in town to sell it from. She was going to have to, market it. Somebody's out there in the corner, maybe one of her sons, oil for sale, oil for sale. They're going around letting people know oil for sale. Today, that might look a little different. That might mean setting up, a corporation, right? You may be setting up an LLC. That may mean that you get a logo done. That may mean that you set up a website or you do some web ads or you find an actual, brick and mortar place to run your business from. That means that you have to have a marketing plan because marketing is of God. I mean, think about it. John the Baptist was a marketer. His whole job was to bring people's attention to Jesus when he came, right? So there's some natural things that you need to do to take that idea that God has given you and get it out to the world. God did not give you that song, that book, that business, that whatever it is, just so that you can enjoy it. He didn't have you create that product for nobody else to enjoy it. No, he gave it to you so that everybody else could enjoy it. And yet you've got to hustle. You got to do the work that's necessary so that it gets out there. And so that means that you're going to have to learn how to make sure that what God has given me can get into the world. You know, God also didn't give you this idea so that you wouldn't profit from it. There are too many great books, great songs, great churches, great organizations that are not having the impact that they should have, and that are not, and the people that created them are struggling financially simply because they haven't hustled. And so I really want to encourage you to do the work so that the word can get out. And of course, as we've already said, when we're talking about flowing, let the Holy Spirit guide you in it. If you're somebody that doesn't know God, you need to know him, because he'll help you. And then when you choose to follow him, he'll come into your heart, and you'll find that he'll lead you by peace in here. He'll lead you by, I like to say, nudges, whispers and nudges in your heart. And he'll lead you sometimes by even stronger voices in here. And you need to take the time to hear that. You can't just run out and do what you think is best. You go ahead and do everything you can do, but then check in here and let God guide you. I love what the Bible says in Proverbs 21:31. The horse is prepared for the day of battle. You prepare the horse, shoe the horse, saddle the horse. You know, make sure the horse is fed. But then safety or deliverance is of the Lord. When you do your part, once again, God will do his part. And then notice last thing he said to them, be smart, or pay thy debt. I like this point. I said it this way: be smart with the money. When God brings money in your hands, don't go out and go shopping. Don't go crazy on Amazon.com. What you should do when God brings money into your hands is pay the bills, pay the debt, get to the place where you are financially healthy and God can use you to bless others, and really you can live off the rest. I mean, what happened with this woman was that this one word from God changed her financial life forever. And one God idea can do that for you. So you need to do these three things. You need to do the grunt work. Don't take shortcuts. And you need to hustle and flow. Now, to help you with that and to help your faith, I want to read Deuteronomy 28 and verse 8. I want you to see that God will be helping you. It says here, as one of the benefits of the covenant that God gave Israel, and if you're a follower of Jesus, it applies to you today as well in your new covenant. What makes a $20 bill better than a 10, but that the 10 is in the 20, and our new covenant has the blessings of the old covenant in it. Well, God said the Lord will guarantee a blessing on everything you do. He'll guarantee it. You got a kingdom-backed guarantee that his blessing will be on you in everything you do. Well, his blessing is God's power to prosper. It's like a coat that you wear, right? And in fact, when I was thinking about this, I thought about that old Peanuts character that used to have a cloud over his head, and everywhere he went, it was like raining on him. So he was always cursed. Everything he did didn't work out. Everything he did fell apart. Well, there's something that's the opposite of that. That's real. It's called the blessing. And when you're somebody that's following God, that blessing is over you. Cat Jones used to have a song, I see a window over your head and it's pouring out blessings. Well, that's what's on you when you're a follower of God and you're a giver as well, is that blessing. And when you get up in the morning, you're wearing the blessing. And when you go to work, you're wearing the blessing. When you sit down to write that script or to write that song or to sing that song or to work on that business plan, you have that blessing, and it will cause you to prosper in what you do. In fact, there are examples in the Bible like this, like Joseph, who was a slave in his master's house, and yet God made whatever he did to prosper, which meant that if he was sweeping, God made it to prosper. He gave him extraordinary success. He increased his success rate. And if he was washing something, God made it to prosper. And if he was managing the money, God made it to prosper. So he just kept seeing promotion in his life because God kept prospering everything that he did. And that's exactly what God's going to do for you as you chase after the dream he's placed in your heart, as you do the things we talked about, so that you're having supernatural success in producing the results that he wants. Psalm 1:3 says it this way. It says, he shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water that brings forth its fruit in its season, whose leaf also shall not wither, and whatever he does shall prosper. It's one of the things that I confess every day over myself and my family. Whatever we do will prosper. We'll prosper in all that we do, everywhere we go, all the days that we know. And that's what God has promised you. He's going to give you what I like to call the prosperous touch. Most of us have heard the story of the Midas touch, right? King Midas woke up one day and he so loved gold, and he found that there was this being in his room, and the being basically asked him, what do you want? And he said, I would like for the Midas touch. I like the gold touch, meaning everything I touch turns to gold. And as the story goes, the being said, you have it. He jumped up, touched his sheets, they turned to gold. He touched his bed, it turned to gold. He's running down the hallway, he's excited. He's touching the walls, it's turning to gold. Everything turns to gold. But then, of course, his daughter runs at him. And when she does, and he tries to stop her, and she hugs him, she turns to gold. And the moral of the story is there are things in life that are more important than money, and there are. But I do want you to know that God will give you what I like to call the prosperous touch. And whatever you touch, whatever you put your hand to will prosper. And God will do that not to help you to have what you just long for, but God will do that because as you work, you will be a blessing to other people. He will take that talent that he's given you, that product he's had you to create, and it will be a blessing to his kingdom, and he'll prosper you in the process. Last thing, Proverbs chapter 13 and verse 22. And of course, as we talked about when we started, we're in the middle of this pandemic, and God's been saying a lot about the time that we're in. We shared last week in our Easter experience that there were a number of prophecies that were given about this time years, in some cases years before. 1986, a man prophesied about this plague coming on New York and the rest of the world, and the world being shut down and a great awakening coming out of it. And that's what's happening. Of course, last year, God had a man prophesy about this as well, and how it would run through Passover. We just came out of Passover, how it would run all the way up through Pentecost. That's at the end of May. And one of the things that he prophesied about was the fact that this would also be a time of a great redistribution of wealth, of a wealth transfer from the hands of the wicked, as the Bible will call them, into the hands of the just. And in Proverbs chapter 13, we can see a promise along these lines where it says, a good man leaveth an inheritance to his children's children, and the wealth of the sinner is laid up. One translation says it is stored up. They're taking the time to store it, to reserve it, but they think they're doing it for themselves, but it's stored up for the just, for those that will live right before God. When you think about this, think about how maybe when you get paid, if you're a tither, you take some of that tithe money and you set it in a different account. Or maybe you take, some of that money that you get paid and you set that in a different account for bills, right? Well, God is saying that the wicked, those that aren't following him and choose to just stay on that course, they're bringing a lot of money in. We know that there are millionaires and billionaires all over this world. And God is saying that they may be gathering up the money, but they're doing it for the righteous, for the just. In fact, in Ecclesiastes chapter 2, I believe, in fact, Job says it this way, that they may gather it, but the just will put it on. Ecclesiastes 2 says something similar. In fact, there are a number of scriptures that talk about a moment where God takes the wealth of the sinner and puts it into the hands of the just. Why would he do that? Because those that don't follow him have been using their wealth to hurt people. They've been using their wealth to keep people caught up in the wrong things so that they won't follow God and they end up dying and going to hell. And God would much rather have his wealth in the hands of people that will serve people and that will preach the good news about him and that will help people go to heaven than in the hands of those that are going to set up porn websites, that are going to, do things that are just wrong before him. And that's just going to hurt people. So God's been talking about this for a while. I know my entire adult life, I've heard prophecies about this moment in time where God would cause a wealth transfer and he would cause wealth to come into the hands of his people. In fact, one of the things I've learned is that it's through the things we talked about today, through his people doing God ideas, following the wisdom of God, that we would get to that place. Well, we are here now. I spoke to a prophetess of God a few weeks ago, and I actually wasn't even calling for this purpose, but she shared with me something the Lord had said to her in February. And she said, the Lord said to her, I've actually slowed the world down. I'm slowing down the activity of the world so that in this leap year, my people that have ears to hear and eyes to see could leap forward. And the transfer of wealth could occur in us leaping forward in this time. The wealth of the wicked in the hands of the just shall be a reality in the leaping forward. So don't slow down, but use this time as a leap forward in which God will begin to accelerate things. Remember, Isaac sowed in a land of famine, and he reaped 100-fold in that year and in that land. Don't get things twisted. Instead, keep your eyes focused, because in this very land, the people that have the wisdom of God and that stay focused will see God prosper them. This is when fortunes are made in times like this. That's where we are right now. That's one reason why I believe this message was so important. We are in a time where God is bringing the wealth of the sinner into the hands of the just. And if you will pursue the things God's put in your heart, God is going to bring wealth into your hands. If you will do the things that we talked about today, if you will do the grunt work, if you won't take shortcuts, if you will hustle and flow, you're going to see that God won't just bring you out of your financial trouble, but God's going to bring you to a place where you're prospering, where you have wealth, where you can say, the blessing of the Lord has made me rich, where you can really be a big giver. And yes, enjoy your life, but even more importantly, help people around the world receive the truth about Jesus. In fact, this is something you see in Jesus' ministry. In Luke chapter 8, it says, soon afterward, Jesus began a tour of the nearby towns and villages, preaching and announcing the good news about the kingdom of God. He took his 12 disciples with him, along with some women who had been cured of evil spirits and diseases. Among them were Mary Magdalene, from whom he had cast out 7 demons, and Joanna, get this, the wife of Chuza, Herod's business manager. Well, Herod was wicked, and Herod's business manager is paid by Herod. So that's the wealth of the wicked. He goes on to say, Susanna and many others contributed from their own resources to support Jesus and his disciples. Did you see that? The wealth of the sinner, the wealth of Herod was coming into the hands of Jesus to help him preach the gospel. There are people who are hurting right now. There are people that need hope and encouragement. And the only real hope right now is in Jesus. And if you're a believer, you care about that, man. You care about your family members that don't know him. You care about those friends and colleagues that don't know him. You care about the fact that people may be dying from a virus here in this world, but there's another virus that's causing them to die spiritually forever. It's the virus of sin. And the only way to get out of it is for them to receive Jesus. You want them to hear about Jesus. And one of the ways that you can help, one of the ways that you can play your part is by chasing after the dream God put in your heart. It's by taking that God idea and fully producing it, doing everything you can do so that God prospers it and God brings wealth into your hands. One of the things I've been declaring for years is I'm a God-made billionaire, but I haven't just been saying that. I've been saying I'm going to give $1 million a year. If I've been saying that because I want to have $1 million a year, that's not my point. My point is I want to give $1 million a year. Why? So that people can hear about Jesus through every avenue possible. So I want to challenge you today. God has given you oil. God has put something in your heart that he can use to help people, to bless people, and to bring money into your hands. Chase after that thing. Do the grunt work. Don't take any shortcuts. Hustle and flow. Believe that God's blessing is on you in everything that you do, and watch God do something amazing for you and through you.